Ladies and gentlemen, the narcissist's world is built on an illusion, a carefully constructed narrative that places them at the center, powerful and in control, while everyone else around them plays a supporting role. Their sense of self-worth is fragile, relying heavily on external validation, and the truth is, they don't experience the depth of genuine connection with others. What they seek is not true love, but admiration, worship, and control. Their actions often leave behind a trail of pain, confusion, and emotional harm as they manipulate and dismiss others in their pursuit of maintaining that illusion. But what happens in the silence after they've hurt you? In the moments when they are alone with their thoughts, when there is no one to impress or manipulate, the truth is far different from the persona they project. Inside, they are not filled with the sense of power they like to portray. In fact, there is a deep, unsettling emptiness that they cannot escape. The very actions that they used to control and hurt you, they also use to reinforce their own insecurity. They don't feel the same kind of remorse that you or others might feel after causing pain. Their guilt is not rooted in empathy, but in the fear that their actions might lead to exposure of their true self. Beneath the surface of their arrogance and grandiosity, there is a terrified child, unsure of their place in the world. They are haunted by the fear that they are unlovable, that their worth is dependent on others constantly reinforcing their superiority. When they hurt you, it's a reflection of their internal need to feel important, to maintain their illusion, and if they believe they've lost that, they experience anxiety. In the quiet aftermath, they often feel a sense of insecurity, questioning whether the facade will continue to hold up. They are not concerned with the pain they've caused, but with the fact that they might have lost a source of validation. In private, the narcissist does not reflect with the same self-awareness that others would. They might convince themselves that you are the problem or that you were too sensitive, but deep down they are only ever concerned with how much control they still have over your perception of them. The fear of being seen for who they really are, of being unmasked, lingers in their thoughts. The act of hurting you has never been about you at all. It's always been about them. A narcissist's world is constructed on a fragile foundation built from self-deception and the constant need for validation. They create a persona that is grand, powerful, and untouchable, designed to ensure they are admired and worshipped. This facade is not just a tool for gaining admiration, but also a shield to protect their fragile ego. The core of their being is insecure, unable to face the truth of their own inadequacies. They are constantly seeking external validation because without it, they feel empty and lost. This need for attention and praise becomes a driving force behind their behavior, influencing how they interact with everyone around them. When they hurt you, whether consciously or not, they do so from a place of emotional emptiness. The actions they take are often about reaffirming their sense of power and superiority. They may belittle, criticize, or manipulate, believing that they are in control, that they can bend others to their will. But deep inside, after the act is done, they are not basking in the glory of their actions. Instead, they are faced with the nagging reality of their own deep insecurity. The very need to hurt others comes from an inner fear of being vulnerable. Narcissists cannot afford to feel vulnerable because that would challenge the illusion they've so carefully built. In the aftermath of their actions, when no one is watching, the truth is they are often filled with anxiety, not because they feel guilty for what they've done, but because they are afraid of the consequences. They fear losing control over how they are perceived, losing their status as the center of attention. Being seen as imperfect or weak, that keeps them trapped in a cycle of manipulation. They are unable to process real remorse because their fear of being unmasked is far greater than any genuine reflection on the pain they've caused. The narcissist's emotional landscape is a constant battle to maintain an image of superiority, a narrative they have carefully constructed and rely on for their sense of self-worth. This image is the armor they wear, protecting them from the truth of their internal struggles. The narcissist is not immune to insecurity. In fact, it is at the core of their identity. Beneath the bravado, they are terrified of being seen as ordinary or unimportant. They need others to affirm their greatness because without this validation, their entire sense of self crumbles. This need for constant affirmation drives their behavior, and when they hurt others, it is often because they feel threatened by someone else's strength or independence. ensuring that no one can overshadow them. But after they've hurt someone, the narcissist mind is not at ease. While they may act as though they are unaffected, deep within, they are often battling their own fears. They know that their actions, whether intentional or not, have consequences that can undo the image they have worked so hard to maintain. The narcissist's inability to genuinely reflect on the harm they cause stems from their fear of exposure. They cannot afford to see themselves as anything less than perfect, because doing so would mean acknowledging their flaws and vulnerabilities. In the quiet moments, when there are no admirers to validate them, the narcissist is left to face a painful reality. They cannot truly connect with others because they are too afraid to show their authentic self. Instead of experiencing remorse or guilt, their primary concern is often the loss of control, the possibility that someone might finally see through the mask they wear. This fear of being unmasked is what drives their ongoing cycle of manipulation and emotional harm. A narcissist thrives on the attention and admiration of others, using it to fill the void they feel within. They present a grand image to the world, one that appears flawless, powerful, and untouchable. But this image is fragile, and beneath the surface, they are constantly battling with feelings of inadequacy and fear of being exposed for what they truly are. To maintain their carefully crafted identity, they rely on manipulation, charm, and control, convincing others to support their self-image and feed their ego. When they hurt others, whether through words or actions, they often do so without fully acknowledging the impact it has. In their mind, they are justified because the act of hurting someone else temporarily reaffirms their sense of power and superiority. But once the initial gratification fades, they are left with a deeper sense of insecurity. They don't experience the same kind of remorse or guilt that others might feel after causing harm. Instead, they are preoccupied with the fear of losing control, of being exposed as less than perfect. They fear that their actions will result in others seeing them as flawed or unworthy. This fear is not born out of empathy for the pain they have caused, but out of the threat to their carefully constructed facade. In private, the narcissist grapples with this fear, often attempting to rationalize their behavior or shift the blame onto others. They cannot truly reflect on their actions in a meaningful way because doing so would require confronting their own vulnerabilities, something they are unwilling to do. Their need for validation and control overrides any true understanding of the harm they cause, and this inner turmoil becomes a constant force in their lives. They can never truly escape the fear of exposure, and this fear is what keeps them trapped in a cycle of emotional manipulation and self-deception. Narcissists operate on the belief that they are superior to others, and their entire identity is rooted in maintaining this illusion. They carefully cultivate a persona that is flawless, untouchable, and deserving of admiration. This persona acts as a shield, protecting them from the vulnerability they fear, the vulnerability that comes with being seen as flawed or unworthy. To keep this image intact, narcissists manipulate, control, and belittle others, constantly seeking validation to reassure themselves of their importance. But after they have hurt someone, especially after they have pushed someone to the brink, they do not feel the guilt or remorse that others might expect. Their primary concern is not the pain they have caused, but the fear that their actions might expose them for who they really are. The moment the narcissist is left alone with their thoughts, the fear of exposure becomes unbearable. They are terrified that others will see past their facade and recognize their deep insecurity. In private, when there is no one left to validate their worth, they are consumed by anxiety. The pain they've caused others doesn't register in a way that leads to empathy or true remorse. Instead, they obsess over the consequences to their own image, worried that their flaws might be revealed. They might try to justify their actions, blaming others or shifting the narrative to avoid confronting their own behavior. This is the narcissist's defense mechanism, a way to preserve their sense of control over their emotions and the perceptions of others. They cannot afford to acknowledge their vulnerabilities, because doing so would mean confronting their greatest fear, that they are not the perfect, all-powerful figure they present to the world. Instead, they continue their emotional manipulation, carefully guarding their image while the fear of exposure lingers in the background, driving them to repeat the cycle of control and self-deception. The narcissist's inner world is a constant struggle to maintain the illusion of perfection. Everything they do, every interaction they have, is focused on reinforcing the narrative that they are superior, untouchable, and deserving of admiration. They have convinced themselves that their worth depends entirely on how others perceive them, and this external validation is the only way they can keep their fragile sense of self intact. When they hurt someone, whether it's through manipulation, cruelty, or neglect, it is not driven by a desire to cause pain, but rather a desperate need to reassert control and maintain their superiority. The act of hurting others is simply a way to reaffirm their dominance, to keep the other person beneath them, in a position where they cannot challenge the narcissist's sense of importance. After the damage has been done, however, the narcissist does not experience the kind of guilt or remorse that might be expected. Instead, they are consumed by the fear that their actions might cause them to lose the very thing they rely on for validation: their control over others. They are deeply afraid of being exposed for who they truly are, a flawed, insecure individual with a fragile sense of self-worth. When they are alone with their thoughts, the mask they wear becomes heavier, and they begin to realize, albeit briefly, that they can't escape the fear of being unmasked. But instead of confronting their feelings, they quickly bury them, retreating into defensiveness or self-righteousness. They may blame the other person for their own pain, convincing themselves that they are justified in their actions, all the while avoiding any reflection on the hurt they have caused. This is the narcissist trap, the need to maintain control, and the constant fear of exposure. Their inner turmoil is masked by their need to protect the facade, which keeps them locked in a cycle of emotional manipulation and self-deception. The narcissist's mind is constantly at war with itself. On one hand, they crave admiration, attention, and the adoration of others. On the other, they live in constant fear of being exposed as imperfect or inadequate. This is why their actions toward others are often manipulative and self-serving. Everything they do is meant to reinforce the illusion that they are exceptional and untouchable. When they hurt someone, whether deliberately or through thoughtless behavior, it is not because they derive satisfaction from the pain they cause, but because in their distorted world, it reaffirms their sense of control and power. The narcissist's sense of self is so fragile that any loss of control, any hint of vulnerability, threatens to unravel everything they have worked so hard to build. When they inflict pain on others, they feel a temporary sense of victory, an affirmation that they are still in charge, still the one who dictates the terms. But once the immediate gratification fades, they are left alone with the fear that their actions might expose them for what they truly are: someone deeply insecure, dependent on the admiration and validation of others to survive. In private, they may not confront the hurt they've caused directly. Instead, they may ruminate on their own fears and anxieties. They fear losing the emotional supply that others provide, and the guilt they feel is not about the pain inflicted on another, but about the risk of losing control. The narcissist may deny any wrongdoings, blaming the other person for their own pain in an effort to preserve their own self-image. This denial is a defense mechanism, one that keeps them from facing the underlying truth. They are not the perfect, untouchable person they project. The fear of exposure keeps them trapped in a never-ending cycle of manipulation, because the truth about their insecurities is far too frightening for them to accept. The narcissist's behavior is rooted in a deep and pervasive fear of vulnerability. This fear manifests in every aspect of their interactions with others. They craft a perfect invulnerable exterior, one that is designed to shield them from the internal turmoil and insecurity that lies beneath. Their need for control, admiration, and validation is not simply about boosting their ego. It is a defense mechanism to protect themselves from the overwhelming fear that they are unworthy, ordinary, or unseen. When they hurt others, whether intentionally or inadvertently, it is often a result of this intense desire to maintain their image of superiority. They use manipulation, belittlement, or passive-aggressive behavior as tools to reassert control, to reaffirm that they are in charge and that they are always one step ahead. In their mind, this ensures that no one will ever see their weaknesses. However, once the damage is done and they are left alone with their thoughts, they do not feel remorse in the way others might. They may not even process the pain they have caused. Instead, they are consumed by the fear that they have lost the very thing they rely on to feel worthy: control. The narcissist is terrified that if their actions are revealed, if their flaws are exposed, the world will see them for who they truly are. Someone insecure and afraid of being judged. This is why they retreat into self-justification, often blaming others or external circumstances for their behavior. Tucking. They cannot accept the reality of their own actions because it would force them to confront the vulnerability they work so hard to avoid. The narcissist's fear of being unmasked and seen as imperfect drives their need for constant manipulation and emotional games, as they are unwilling to face the truth of their own limitations. Instead, they will continue to hide behind the facade of superiority, never able to reconcile the person they project with the person they truly are inside. The narcissist's existence is a constant balancing act, one in which they must manage an illusion of superiority while hiding the deep insecurity that lies beneath. Every interaction, every relationship is carefully curated to maintain the image they've worked so hard to project. They require constant validation from others, using praise and admiration to stave off the overwhelming sense of inadequacy that haunts them. When they hurt someone, it is often because they are triggered by their own fear of being exposed or overlooked. They lash out, manipulate or belittle in an attempt to reassert control over their environment and restore their fragile sense of power. They believe that, by diminishing others, they are somehow elevating themselves, solidifying their place in the world as someone who is in charge and untouchable. But when the immediate rush of control fades and they are alone with their thoughts, the narcissist is not at peace. Instead, they are left facing the very thing they try so hard to avoid: vulnerability. They are terrified of being unmasked, of having their true insecure nature revealed to the world. While they may not experience remorse in the way others would, there is a deep fear that their behavior could cost them the admiration they so desperately need. They are consumed with anxiety, not because they have hurt someone else, but because they are afraid that their actions might expose them for who they really are. In the quiet of their own mind, they wrestle with this fear of exposure, but rather than confronting it, they bury it under layers of defensiveness and self-justification. The narcissist cannot allow themselves to admit fault because doing so would challenge the very foundation of their constructed identity. Instead, they continue to manipulate, to control, and to play the game of perfection, all while living in the constant fear that their true self will one day be revealed. The narcissist's life is driven by the need to uphold an image of greatness. They live in constant fear of being seen as anything less than perfect. This fear is not just about losing admiration, it's about losing their entire sense of self. Behind their grandiose behavior and manipulation lies an inner emptiness that they are desperate to fill. They believe that by controlling how others perceive them, they can maintain some semblance of value. Every interaction becomes a transaction, where the goal is to extract admiration and reinforce the illusion of superiority. When they hurt someone, whether emotionally or physically, it is often because the other person threatens their carefully constructed self-image. The narcissist cannot stand the idea of being challenged, of being seen as anything less than superior. Hurting others becomes a way for them to reaffirm their dominance and maintain control, even if it is at the expense of someone else's well-being. However, once the initial satisfaction of causing harm fades, they are left to face the uncomfortable reality of their own insecurity. In private, the narcissist may not process the hurt they have caused others, but they are consumed with fear. The fear is not of the pain they inflicted, but of the possibility that their actions might reveal their vulnerabilities. They are terrified that their flaws will be exposed, and that the facade they have spent so long perfecting will come crashing down. This fear overrides any potential guilt or remorse for what they have done. Instead, the narcissist shifts blame onto others, creating elaborate justifications for their actions. This helps them avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that they are not the all-powerful, flawless person they present to the world. The narcissist's greatest fear is exposure, and the fear of being unmasked is what drives them to continue manipulating others and living a life of constant self-deception. The narcissist's life is a carefully constructed web of illusions, designed to hide the deep insecurity they feel at their core. They craft a persona of superiority, perfection, and untouchability, but this facade is not built out of genuine self-belief. It is a defense mechanism against the overwhelming fear of being seen as inadequate. To maintain this image, the narcissist must constantly seek validation from others. This need for external affirmation is not just about feeding their ego. It is a survival strategy, one that allows them to avoid facing the terrifying truth of their own vulnerabilities. When the narcissist hurts others, it is often a reaction to feeling threatened or diminished. Their sense of power and control is fragile, and when it is challenged, they will resort to manipulation, gaslighting, or cruelty to regain dominance. They see these tactics as necessary for preserving their image, but deep down, they are terrified of the consequences. Once the immediate satisfaction of having reasserted control fades, the narcissist is left alone with their fear. The fear is not about the damage they have caused to others, but about the potential exposure of their own weaknesses. In the quiet moments when they are no longer in control of the narrative, the narcissist's anxiety intensifies. They are terrified that their true self, the insecure, imperfect person they work so hard to suppress, will be revealed. This fear overrides any capacity for genuine reflection or remorse. Instead of acknowledging the harm they have done, they shift the blame, convincing themselves that their actions were justified or that the other person deserved it. This denial is not just a way to protect their image. It is a way to avoid confronting the deep-seated insecurity that would crumble their carefully constructed world. The narcissist is locked in a cycle of self-deception, always running from the truth of who they are, unable to accept the reality of their own flaws and limitations.